The moment Kayla walked through the door of my baby shower sobbing, mascara already streaked down her cheeks like she'd rehearsed the timing in the car, I looked past her shoulder at Dr. Reyes standing by the punch table, and I felt something in my chest unclench for the first time in 9 months. Because this time, I wasn't the only one who knew. "I can't believe I'm here," Kayla said, loud enough for the whole backyard to hear, loud enough that the string quartet my mother-in-law had hired actually stopped playing mid-phrase, the cellist's bow frozen an inch above the strings. I told myself I'd stay home, but Maddie's my sister, and I didn't want to make this about me. She let the sentence hang there, unfinished, which was always her favorite trick. Let the silence do the cruelty for her. Let 40 imaginations fill in the blank with something worse than whatever she was about to say. My mother was already moving toward her, arms out, weaving between rented chairs and a table of tiny elephant cupcakes, a woman who had spent 40 years mistaking chaos for intimacy, who had never once in my entire life moved that fast toward me. "Baby, what happened? What's wrong?" Kayla pressed a hand to her stomach. Flat, I noticed, flatter than it should have been if the story she was about to tell was true, flatter than mine had been at 8 weeks, let alone whatever gestational age she was about to claim, and said, "I lost the baby 2 days ago. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to ruin this for Maddie, but I couldn't sit at home alone another minute." 40 people went silent around a table covered in tiny elephant cupcakes and a banner that said, "Welcome Baby Grace" in gold. Cursive my mother-in-law had ordered from a calligrapher 3 states away. I stood there in a dress my husband had picked out because it made me feel, in his words, like sunshine, 8 months pregnant, one hand instinctively cradling the underside of my belly, watching my sister perform grief in front of my baby shower for what I would later understand, once the whole architecture of it finally came down, was closer to the 4th time than the 3rd. I felt Grace shift inside me, a slow roll from one side to the other. The particular movement she made whenever I tensed up, as though even from inside she could feel the change in my breathing. I watched my Aunt Denise's hand fly to her chest. I watched a woman I didn't recognize, someone's +1, a coworker of Carol's I'd learn later, lean over to whisper something sympathetic to the person beside her, already within seconds, absorbing Kayla's grief as the story of the afternoon. I watched my father go very still in his chair at the edge of the yard, the stillness he always went to when he didn't know what to do, which was, in my experience, almost always. And I thought, standing there with my hand on my belly and my sister's performance unspooling in front of 40 witnesses, not this time, not at this one. You do not get this one too. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I want you to understand why I didn't scream, why I didn't cry, why I stood very still in the middle of my own party and let my hand find Dr. Reyes's eyes across the yard. The way you find a life raft you already know is there because you spent 3 weeks quietly making sure it would be. Because I had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. Longer than I think even I understood, standing there, feeling my daughter shift and settle low against my ribs as if she, too, were bracing for what was coming. To understand what happened at that shower, you have to understand what it cost me to get there. You have to understand the years underneath it, because grief, real grief, doesn't announce itself with perfect timing at other people's parties. Real grief doesn't need an audience. What my sister built over 4 years was something else entirely. A kind of performance art disguised as tragedy, staged with such precision that by the time I finally saw the pattern whole, I almost couldn't believe I hadn't seen it sooner. Almost. But the pattern didn't start with the miscarriages. That's just where it became impossible to argue with. It started years earlier, in smaller, stupider ways that I didn't have language for until I was an adult watching them repeat in a new, higher stakes register. Kayla is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, there had been a specific tax levied on my good days. When I made the varsity soccer team at 15, Kayla twisted her ankle at practice that same week. Not badly. A mild sprain the pediatrician cleared in 4 days, but badly enough that my mother spent the entire week of my first varsity game managing Kayla's crutches and Kayla's ice packs and Kayla's dramatic hobble through the kitchen, and nobody came to my game. When I got into my first choice college, Kayla was rejected from her safety school on the same afternoon, a coincidence of mail delivery that somehow required an entire family dinner devoted to consoling her, my acceptance letter sitting unopened on the counter until nearly midnight. When I got my first real job offer at 23, Kayla was let go from a retail position she'd held for 4 months, under circumstances she described differently every time she told the story. And my parents took her out to dinner that night to lift her spirits. A dinner I wasn't invited to because, as my mother explained afterward, it hadn't seemed like the right time to also celebrate. None of these things, on their own, were the miscarriages. I want to be careful about that because even now, even having watched the whole architecture come down in a stranger's backyard, I don't want to accuse my sister of things I can't prove. The sprained ankle was probably real. The rejection letter was certainly real. The job loss, who knows? What was real, consistently, unmistakably real across 15 years, was the reflex in my family. The way any good news of mine seemed to summon within days, some fresh crisis of Kayla's that required immediate, total attention, and the way nobody, not once in 15 years, ever seemed to find that timing strange enough to remark on out loud. I used to think I was imagining it. I used to think that was simply what it felt like to be the less troubled sister. That my life being easier naturally receded into the background whenever anyone else's life got hard, the way traffic clears for an ambulance. It took me until my mid-20s, sitting in a friend's kitchen describing all of this out loud for the first time and watching her face go slowly, quietly appalled, to understand that other families didn't run on this particular current. That most families didn't require one daughter to apologize, essentially for the crime of having a good week. That friend was Priya, actually, though I didn't tell you that yet. We were 24, sharing a bottle of wine in her studio apartment after I'd been passed over for a promotion I badly wanted. Venting about work, when somehow the conversation drifted backward through 15 years of birthdays overshadowed and milestones quietly recategorized as secondary. And I watched her set her glass down, very carefully, very deliberately, and say, "Maddie, do you understand that isn't normal? What you just described to me, that's not just sisters being sisters, that's a pattern. That's a person who needs you to be smaller in order to feel like herself." I remember laughing it off. At the time, some reflexive defensiveness kicking in, even though every word she'd said matched something I'd felt for years without ever letting myself name it. It would be 2 more years and an engagement party before I understood how right she'd been, and another 2 years after that before I stopped making excuses for it out loud, even if I never fully stopped making them internally. The first time the pattern escalated into something with real stakes, something that couldn't be waved away as a sprained ankle or a rejection letter, was my engagement party. I was 26. Daniel had proposed on a Tuesday, in our kitchen, no crowd, no orchestrated flash mob, just him on one knee on the cracked linoleum holding a ring his grandmother had worn for 51 years. And I had cried the good kind of tears, the kind that make your face hurt from smiling, the kind you remember for the rest of your life as the last purely happy moment before your family found a way to complicate it. We planned a small party. 40 people. My parents' backyard. The same backyard, actually. The same string of lights still hanging from the same oak tree 9 years later. The same rented folding chairs that seemed to reappear at every family gathering like a recurring cast member. I spent 3 weeks choosing a dress. My mother spent 3 weeks planning the menu. Kayla, as far as any of us knew, spent 3 weeks doing whatever Kayla did, which at that point in her life meant working part-time at a boutique downtown and dating a man named Curtis who none of us had met and who, notably, was never seen or mentioned again after that night. Kayla arrived an hour late wearing black, not navy, not dark green, not a dress that could be read as merely subdued. Black, head to toe, the way you'd dress for a funeral. And when my Aunt Denise asked, gently, if she was feeling all right, Kayla said, in a voice pitched exactly loud enough to carry to the dessert table where my grandmother was cutting the cake, that she'd had a miscarriage the week before and hadn't told anyone because she didn't want anyone worrying. Nobody asked why a woman grieving a miscarriage would choose to announce it publicly, unprompted, at her sister's engagement party, 40 minutes after arriving, timed with what I would later recognize as surgical precision to land exactly as the toasts were about to begin. Nobody asked why there had been no doctor's appointment anyone could confirm, no hospital bill, no Curtis standing beside her with his own face wrecked by loss, no evidence at all beyond Kayla's word and Kayla's black dress and Kayla's perfectly modulated voice breaking on cue. My mother spent the rest of the night with her arm around Kayla's shoulders while my aunt refilled Kayla's wine glass. Wine, I remember thinking dimly even then, for a woman who'd supposedly just lost a pregnancy. And my own fiancé stood next to me, quietly furious on my behalf, unable to say anything because what do you say? What do you say to a woman standing in the wreckage of a lie you can't prove, at the one party that was supposed to be yours, surrounded by people who have already decided whose pain matters more? The toasts happened eventually, an hour later than planned, in a hush that felt more like a wake than a celebration. My father raised his glass and said something short and awkward about family and new beginnings, glancing at Kayla twice while he said it, as though the word beginnings itself needed to apologize to her. Daniel's parents, who had flown in from Ohio for the weekend, sat stiffly at the edge of the yard, not understanding what had happened to the party they'd traveled for, and I remember catching my future mother-in-law's eye and seeing, for just a second, an expression I wouldn't fully understand until years later. Pity, not for Kayla, but for me. I remember going up to my old bedroom that night after everyone left, sitting on the edge of the bed I'd slept in as a teenager, still wearing the dress I'd chosen so carefully, and hearing my mother's voice through the wall telling my father that Kayla needed us more right now, that I would understand, that I had so much and Kayla had so little, as though grief were a pie and there was only one slice and Kayla had gotten to it first, before the party even really started, before I'd had a single uninterrupted hour of my own joy. I didn't argue. I learned that night, lying in the dark with the ring still new and heavy on my finger, that arguing only made me look jealous of my sister's pain. So I swallowed it. I let my engagement party become, in the family's collective memory, the night everyone remembered as the night Kayla lost her baby. And 2 months later, at Thanksgiving, Kayla was drinking wine again, laughing at something on her phone, dating someone new named Marcus, and nobody in my family ever once said the word timeline out loud. Nobody asked when Curtis had gone from boyfriend to ghost. Nobody asked why a woman who'd lost a child 8 weeks earlier was, by the holidays, already cheerfully swiping through a new dating app at the dinner table. I asked Daniel once quietly in the car on the drive home from that Thanksgiving whether he thought it was strange. He was quiet for a long time before he answered, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. "I think," he finally said, "that I don't want to be the guy who accuses my future sister-in-law of lying about a miscarriage. Even if I think it, especially if I think it." And I understood in that moment exactly the trap Kayla had built for all of us. Not just my parents, not just me, but everyone who loved me, everyone who might otherwise have said something. There was no way to question it without becoming the villain. There was no way to protect me without attacking her. She had built a story with only one exit, and the exit required someone to be cruel to a grieving woman in order to be kind to me. Priya was the only person who ever said it out loud, that first year. And even she only said it once, late one night over the phone, her voice pitched carefully low as though Kayla might somehow overhear from 3 states away. "I've known you since we were 9, she said. "I've watched every version of this, and I love you too much to just nod along anymore. Maddie, I don't believe her. I haven't believed her since the engagement party. I think you know that too, and I think you've been waiting for someone else to say it first so you wouldn't have to be the one." I didn't answer her for a long moment. Then I said, "If I say it out loud, I have to do something about it. And there's nothing to do. She's my sister. What am I supposed to do, demand medical records at Thanksgiving?" "No," Priya said, "but you don't have to keep pretending you don't see it either. Those are different things, believing her, and just going quiet so the peace holds." I didn't have an answer for that either. Not then. It would take me 4 more years, another party, another performance, and a doctor willing to set down a cup of punch before I understood the difference Priya was describing well enough to actually act on it. The second time was my wedding. Or rather, the 6 months leading up to it, because Kayla didn't wait for the day itself this time. She'd learned, I think, that a single performance could be stretched across an entire season if you paced it correctly. It started at my dress fitting, 4 months before the wedding, which Kayla insisted on attending even though I hadn't invited her. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I did not invite my sister to my dress fitting. It was meant to be small. Me, my mother, my future mother-in-law, and Priya, who had been my best friend since we were 9 years old and who had, by that point, developed a low, watchful wariness toward Kayla that she never quite managed to hide. Kayla heard about the appointment from my mother, who mentioned it in passing the way she mentioned everything to Kayla, and showed up at the boutique unannounced, taking the corner chair that had been set aside for my mother-in-law, who arrived 10 minutes later to find her seat occupied and said nothing. Because by then, Daniel's family had also learned the particular etiquette of not saying anything. 20 minutes into me standing on a small carpeted pedestal in ivory silk, arms raised while the seamstress pinned the bodice, Kayla doubled over in her chair with a small, sharp cry. Not a hospital visit, not a call to urgent care, just doubled over in a bridal boutique in front of a woman in a wedding dress, hand pressed to her lower abdomen, breath coming in short, controlled gasps that looked, to my eye even then, more like a performance of pain than pain itself. I had, by that point, watched enough real pain in my life to have developed an instinct for the difference, though I would spend years not trusting that instinct, not out loud. The fitting ended immediately. Everyone's attention snapped to Kayla. My mother crouching beside her chair, the seamstress hovering uselessly with a mouthful of pins, my mother-in-law asking in a low, alarmed voice whether they should call someone. And I stood on the pedestal in a half-pinned dress, arms still slightly raised from where the seamstress had left them, watching my own wedding fitting dissolve around a sister who hadn't even been invited. My mother drove Kayla home 20 minutes later, apologizing to me on her way out the door in a tone that made clear the apology was a formality, not a real one. And I stood in the dressing room afterward, asking the shop girl, a stranger, to help me out of the dress because there was no one left in the building who belonged to me. 3 days later, Kayla posted a black square on Instagram with a caption about angel babies and gentle inquiries in the comments and hearts from people I recognized as my own high school classmates, people who would be standing in my wedding photos in 4 months, and the post got more engagement than my actual wedding announcement had gotten 2 months earlier. Which I know because I checked obsessively, alone in my apartment at 11 at night, doing math I hated myself for doing. I called my mother the next day, hoping, foolishly, that some space and a night's sleep might have shifted her perspective. Instead, she spent the first 10 minutes of the call updating me on Kayla's condition. Resting, mostly, eating very little, understandably fragile, before I managed to ask gently whether anyone had actually confirmed with a doctor that anything had happened at all. Maddie. My mother's voice had gone flat and disappointed, a tone she reserved I'd noticed, exclusively for moments when I failed to extend Kayla the benefit of a doubt she extended automatically and without limit. She is your sister. Why would she lie about something like this? I'm not saying she's lying, I said, though some traitor part of me already believed exactly that. I'm just asking if anyone's actually confirmed. You're 4 months from your wedding, my mother said, cutting me off, and your sister just lost a baby, and you want to talk about confirming things. Do you hear yourself? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound, in that framing, monstrous. That was the trick of it. I understood even then. She had built a story where the only available responses were total belief or total cruelty, with no room in between for the plain, reasonable question of whether any of it was true. I let it go. I always let it go back then. I hadn't yet learned that letting it go wasn't kindness. It was just a slower kind of damage, paid out over years instead of all at once. At the wedding itself, she gave a speech. Nobody had asked her to give a speech. The toast list had been finalized weeks earlier, coordinated carefully by the wedding planner, my maid of honor Priya first, then Daniel's best man, then my father. But midway through the toasts, between Priya's and my father's, Kayla stood up at her table, tapped her glass with a fork the way you do when you intend to hijack a room, and talked for 6 minutes. I know it was 6 minutes because Priya, sitting beside me, timed it on her phone under the table, her jaw tight the entire time. I want to say something about my sister, Kayla began, and the room, primed by 4 months of quiet, sympathetic rumor about her loss, immediately softened toward her, glasses lowering, attention swiveling. This year taught me more about resilience than any year of my life. I lost something I wanted more than almost anything, and in the middle of that, I watched my sister build something beautiful anyway. I used to think that would make me bitter. Instead, it taught me that joy and grief can live in the same room, if you let them. She paused there, dabbing carefully at eyes that were, I noticed even through my own hurt and fury, remarkably dry for someone supposedly reliving her deepest loss in real time. So Maddie, I am so proud of you for moving forward, even when life doesn't go as planned. Some of us are still learning how. It was, I would think years later, an almost impressive piece of writing. Vague enough to apply to nothing specific, specific enough to imply everything, engineered so that any objection to it would sound like an objection to grief itself, rather than to the woman performing it. Half the room was crying about Kayla by the time she sat back down, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin someone had rushed to hand her, while my new husband gripped my hand under the table hard enough to leave a mark and leaned over to whisper, so only I could hear, did she just make our wedding toast about her miscarriage? She had. She absolutely had. And when I brought it up to my mother the following week, gently, carefully, choosing every word the way you choose footing on ice, my mother said the words that ended the conversation every single time. The words I would hear so many variations of over the years that I could recite them in my sleep. She's still grieving, Maddie. You have everything. Can't you just let her have this? I stopped bringing it up after that. Not because I believed her. By then, I didn't. Not fully. Not in the part of me that had started keeping a private, ugly little file in my head of every date, every convenient timing, every miscarriage that arrived exactly when my life required no attention be paid to Kayla instead. I stopped bringing it up because every time I did, I became the villain of the story. The sister with everything, unable to spare an ounce of grace for the sister with nothing. It is a particular kind of loneliness. Being disbelieved not because anyone has evidence you're wrong, but because believing you would cost too much. The third time, though nobody in my family would ever count it as a third time, because by then the pattern had become so normalized it barely registered as a pattern at all, was smaller, quieter, almost a footnote. And it happened at my gender reveal. 11 months before the shower that would finally end things, I'd debated even having one. Daniel and I weren't the balloon and confetti type, but his mother had insisted, had already bought the pink and blue smoke bombs before I'd fully agreed. And so we found ourselves, one Saturday afternoon, standing in her backyard with a small crowd waiting to find out whether Grace would be a boy or a girl. It was a good day for most of it. Daniel's father grilled too much food, as he always did. Priya brought a bottle of sparkling cider for me and real champagne for everyone else, and made a small, funny toast about how she'd known me since we were 9 and had therefore known this baby, in some cosmic sense, for 13 years already. My mother cried a little when the powder came out pink, the good kind of tears, unmixed with anything else, and for a moment, one full, unguarded moment, I let myself believe this pregnancy might simply be allowed to happen without complication, the way I imagined it happened for other people whose families didn't require attacks on every good afternoon. Kayla showed up sober, on time, seemingly fine, and for a moment, a full foolish moment, I let myself hope this would be one of the ordinary days, one of the days where my sister simply existed in a room without needing to become its center of gravity. She lasted almost the entire event. It was only afterward, during the cake cutting, gender-confirmed pink frosting on my fingers, that she pulled me aside by the drinks table and told me, quietly, just for me this time, no audience, that she'd found out that week she was pregnant too, and that she hadn't wanted to say anything because she didn't want to take away from my day. I remember standing there with pink frosting on my fingers, feeling something in me go very cold and very still because I recognized the shape of it immediately. The announcement disguised as restraint, the wound offered up as a gift. I asked her, carefully, how far along she was. She said she wasn't sure yet, hadn't been to the doctor yet, just knew from a home test. I asked if she was excited. She said she was scared actually, given everything she'd been through. And I felt the old machinery of the story beginning to assemble itself around us. The setup, I understood even then, for a loss that would eventually be revealed at some future date I couldn't yet predict, timed to whatever moment in my own pregnancy would hurt the most. I never heard about that pregnancy again. Not a confirmation, not an update, not a loss. It simply evaporated from conversation, the way earlier pregnancies never quite had, and I understood, filing it away in the same private ledger I'd been keeping for 4 years, that she had either changed her mind about the timing or the story hadn't been needed yet and she was saving herself for something bigger. Daniel's family, unlike mine, had never gotten the full history until well after the wedding. They'd only ever witnessed one performance, the toast, and had no context for the engagement party that preceded it. It wasn't until I was 6 months pregnant, sitting at Carol's kitchen table over tea, that I finally told her everything, start to finish, the sprained ankle and the rejection letter and the black dress at my engagement party, the dress fitting Kayla wasn't invited to, the 6-minute toast Priya had timed under the table. Carol listened without interrupting, her tea going cold in front of her, and when I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I cried at that toast," she said quietly. "I told my sister about it on the phone the next week. I said your family had been through something so hard right before the wedding and handled it with such grace." She shook her head slowly. "I feel like a fool." "You're not a fool," I said. "You believed a grieving woman. That's not foolish. That's just decent." "Maybe," Carol said. "But I don't like the idea of my decency being used like that, against you of all people." She was quiet for a moment, turning her cup slowly on its saucer. "If she ever tries something like that again, in my house, at one of my parties, I won't stay quiet next time. I want you to know that." I didn't know then that her house, her backyard, would be exactly where the something again would happen, 11 days before Grace was born. I didn't know Carol would keep that promise, standing in her own yard with her arms crossed, telling my sister precisely what her false grief had cost a woman who'd never even met her before that day. I only knew, sitting at that kitchen table with cold tea in a hand wrapped around mine, that for the first time, someone outside my immediate family had heard the whole pattern laid out end to end and hadn't needed convincing at all. Priya, who had watched all 3 previous performances from a slightly greater, more skeptical distance than the rest of my family, confronted Kayla directly about it once, the only time either of us ever tried anything so direct. It happened at my baby shower planning meeting, 6 weeks before the actual event, in a booth at the diner where Priya and Carol and I had gathered to finalize the guest list. Kayla wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't her event to plan. But she'd shown up anyway, uninvited, the way she'd shown up to my dress fitting years earlier, and settled into the booth like she'd always belonged there. "You mentioned to Maddie you might be pregnant again," Priya said flatly. No preamble, stirring her coffee with a directness that made Carol's eyebrows shoot up and my own stomach drop. "At the gender reveal, any update on that?" Kayla's face flickered just slightly, the particular flicker of someone recalculating an audience they hadn't expected to be hostile. "I lost it," she said quietly, eyes dropping to the table. "A few weeks after. I didn't want to bring it up again, not with everything going on for Maddie." "Which doctor did you see?" Priya asked, still stirring her coffee, still not looking up, her voice almost bored, almost gentle, which made it so much worse. "Why does that matter?" "It doesn't," Priya said. "I was just curious." And she let the silence sit there, exactly the way Kayla always let silences sit, exactly the way I'd watched Kayla do it 100 times until Kayla changed the subject to the guest list and nobody ever mentioned it again. Priya told me afterward, in the parking lot, that she hadn't expected an answer. She just wanted Kayla to feel, for once, what it was like to have a silence turned back on her. I didn't know yet that the something bigger would be my baby shower. But I knew, standing in my mother-in-law's kitchen a week later scraping leftover pink frosting into the trash, that it was coming. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing in your knees. I told Daniel about the phantom pregnancy that night, sitting cross-legged on our bed while he changed out of his shirt from the party, and watched his jaw tighten in the specific way it always did whenever Kayla's name came up now. 4 years and 1 wedding toast into understanding exactly who she was. "She's building something," he said. "I don't know what yet, but she's building it." "I know," I said. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer that night. It would take me another 5 months and a doctor's appointment and a long, careful conversation across an exam table before I finally did. So when I got pregnant with Grace for real, the pregnancy that would become the shower, I didn't tell my family for 4 months. I told Daniel, I told Priya, sworn to secrecy over a bottle of wine she barely let me touch. And I told Dr. Reyes, who had been my OB since I was 22, who had also, awkwardly, uncomfortably, been Kayla's OB on and off for the same span of years, in the same small practice, in the same small town none of us had ever left. A town small enough that the family doctor and the family secrets tended to circle the same 3 or 4 clinics on Main Street. Here's the part I need you to understand about Dr. Reyes, because it matters more than almost anything else in this story. She had delivered me, at 28, in the same hospital where she'd delivered half my graduating class. She had, over a decade, listened to every version of my family's mythology, the golden sister, the tragic sister, without ever confirming or denying anything. Because that's what a good doctor does. She holds the line of confidentiality even when the people around her are constructing entire family narratives out of things she may or may not know to be false. I never asked her to break that line. I never wanted her to. Not really. Not even in my angriest, most exhausted moments. What I wanted, when I finally sat across from her at 16 weeks pregnant with my hands shaking in my lap on the exam table paper, was something much simpler than a betrayal of anyone's privacy. "I think my sister's gonna do something," I told her, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. "At my shower or before it or during it, I don't know what, but I know the shape of it by now. She always does. And I need you to know that if she says something about you, about a visit, about a diagnosis, about anything medical, that I'm not asking you to violate anyone's privacy. I would never ask that of you. I just need you to know it's coming, so you're not blindsided the way the rest of us always are." Dr. Reyes looked at me for a long moment, the kind of long moment where I could see her weighing every professional and ethical obligation she carried, and I braced myself for a gentle clinical refusal. "Maddie," she said carefully, "I can't discuss another patient's care with you. You understand that, even hypothetically." "I know. I'm not asking you to. But I can tell you this." She set down my chart, folded her hands. "If someone stands in a room and makes a false public claim about their own medical history, about something that supposedly happened, a diagnosis, a visit, an event, and that claim is factually incorrect, I am allowed to correct a false statement of fact. That's not a confidentiality violation. That's not me disclosing anything about anyone's actual care. That's just not letting a lie use my professional name as its alibi. Those are two very different things, legally and ethically, and I want you to understand the difference because I think it matters to you. It does. I'm not saying anything happened or didn't happen with anyone, she added, and I understood she meant it, understood she was protecting a line even in the act of describing it to me. I'm telling you how the line works, in case you ever need to know where it is. I didn't ask her anything else that day. I didn't need to. I understood, the way you understand a door has been left unlocked without anyone having to say so aloud, that if Kayla ever stood in a room and said the words I was treated by Dr. Reyes for this, and it wasn't true, the truth had somewhere to go. It had a person willing to carry it. I went back to see Dr. Reyes twice more before the shower, ostensibly for routine appointments. A 20-week anatomy scan, a glucose test at 28 weeks, and each time at the end of the visit, we circled back to the same quiet, careful conversation, refining it the way you'd refine an escape route, walking it over and over until the steps were automatic. I keep thinking about what happens if she doesn't say your name specifically, I told her at the 20-week appointment, lying back on the exam table while she measured my belly with a soft tape, Grace's heartbeat still whooshing faintly from the Doppler a moment before. What if she just says, "my doctor," without naming you? What if she's smarter than that this time? Then there's nothing for me to correct, and nothing happens, Dr. Reyes said simply. I'm not going to volunteer information nobody's asked me to confirm or deny. I can only correct a lie that names me specifically. If she's careful, Maddie, this doesn't work, and you'll have to find another way. I want you to understand that going in, so you're not counting on something I might not be able to give you. I understood. I told her I understood. But some part of me, some tired 4 years deep part of me, knew, with a certainty I couldn't fully explain, that Kayla wouldn't be careful. Care had never been the point of her performances. The point had always been maximum impact, maximum sympathy, maximum audience, and Dr. Reyes was, whether Kayla realized it or not, the single most credible name she could invoke in this town. She would use it. She always reached for the most convincing detail available to her, the piece of specificity that made a story impossible to doubt, and in a town this small, a doctor's name was the most convincing detail there was. At the 28-week appointment, sipping the sickly orange glucose drink in the waiting room beforehand, I told Dr. Reyes about the gender reveal, the quiet conversation by the drinks table, the pregnancy that evaporated without confirmation or explanation, the strange cold feeling of watching a new performance being seeded 11 months before it was needed. Dr. Reyes listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable in the particular way doctors learn to keep their faces unreadable. And when I finished, she said only, "That's useful to know. Not for anything I'd act on differently, just useful for you to see how far ahead she plans. It might help you trust your own instincts a little more going forward once this is over." She was right. It did. I invited Dr. Reyes to my baby shower 3 weeks later. Not as my doctor, I told my mother, when she noticed the name on the guest list and asked, with faint surprise, why my OB was coming to a family party. As a friend, Dr. Reyes had delivered half the women in this town. It wasn't strange for her to be invited to things. Our families had overlapped at church functions and school fundraisers for years. My mother accepted the explanation without a flicker of suspicion, because my mother had never once, in 4 years, suspected the person who actually deserved suspicion. I told Priya the whole plan 2 nights before the shower, sitting on my kitchen floor because my back hurt too much to sit anywhere else, and she'd gone very quiet, then very fierce. "You shouldn't have to do this," she said. "You shouldn't have to build a legal contingency plan for your own baby shower." "I know," I said, "but I'm done being surprised by her. I would rather build a door I never need to open than stand there again with nothing in my hands." I did not know, when I sent that invitation, exactly what Kayla was going to do. Or when. I only knew, with a certainty that had calcified over 4 years into something almost like peace, that she would do something because the math of it had become impossible to ignore. She had, by then, staged 3 devastating losses at the 3 biggest moments of my adult life, each one bigger and better timed than the last, and I was 11 days from the biggest moment yet. The arrival of the child whose entire existence, if I let it, was about to be swallowed by my sister's need to be its center of gravity too. I was right to prepare. I had no idea, though, how badly she'd time it, or how loudly. The shower itself had been, up until that moment, exactly the afternoon I'd hoped for. My mother-in-law, Carol, had outdone herself. Round tables draped in soft sage linen scattered across the backyard. The oak trees strung with the same warm globe lights she used for every gathering. A dessert table anchored by a 3-tier cake shaped like a stack of baby blocks that spelled Grace in pale gold icing. Priya had organized a game involving guessing the circumference of my belly with string, which had produced exactly the kind of loud, easy laughter I'd been quietly starving for at every previous family event. Daniel had shown up for the last hour, technically not invited to what was supposed to be a women's shower by old-fashioned tradition, but Carol had waved him in anyway, and he'd spent 20 minutes crouched by my chair with his hand resting lightly on my belly, grinning like a man who still couldn't quite believe his luck. I remember thinking, 20 minutes before Kayla arrived, that this might actually be the first major family event of my adult life that simply happened the way it was supposed to happen. I remember feeling almost embarrassed by how badly I wanted that, how much I wanted after 4 years, just one afternoon that stayed mine from start to finish. Then the side gate creaked, the way it always did, and I looked up to see Kayla walking across the lawn in black. "I saw Dr. Reyes on Tuesday," Kayla said, and there it was. She said it like a woman laying down a card she believed was unbeatable, glancing toward Dr. Reyes as she said it, a challenge disguised as grief, because Kayla had never once in her life considered that the person she was using as a prop might have a voice, a chart, a memory, and no incentive whatsoever to protect her. She confirmed it. "I lost him on Tuesday." My mother made a small, broken sound, both hands flying to her mouth. My mother-in-law's face crumpled with an instinctive, generous sympathy that made something in my chest twist even as I watched her fall for it, because she didn't know the pattern. She'd only ever seen Kayla at the wedding, hadn't been there for the engagement party, had no way of knowing this was a rerun. 40 people who had come to celebrate my daughter turned as one organism toward my sister, and I watched 4 years of my life get swallowed whole by a lie so familiar I could have mouthed it along with her, syllable for syllable, like a song you've heard too many times on the radio. And then, Dr. Reyes set down her cup of punch. She did it quietly. That's the detail I remember most afterward, replaying the moment over and over in the weeks that followed. She didn't slam it down, didn't stand up dramatically, didn't do anything that would have made the moment about her instead of about the truth. She simply set the cup down on the edge of the dessert table, next to the elephant cupcakes, and said, in a voice that wasn't loud but didn't need to be, because the yard had gone so silent that a single word carried to every corner of it, "Kayla." My sister turned. Whatever she expected to see in Dr. Reyes's face, confirmation perhaps, or simple silent support, the way a doctor might nod along at a family gathering to spare everyone an awkward scene, it was not what she found there. "I need to correct something," Dr. Reyes said, "because you've made a factual claim about me in front of a large group of people and I won't let it stand." Kayla's face did something I had never seen it do before. In 29 years of watching every version of her performances, not grief, not even alarm, not yet. Confusion first, the particular confusion of a woman who has never once, not a single time, had a prop object to being used. "I did not see you on Tuesday," Dr. Reyes said, each word laid down like a brick, unhurried, unshakable. "I did not confirm a pregnancy loss with you on Tuesday or any other day this month. In fact, the last time you were in my office was 6 weeks ago for a refill on an allergy prescription, and you specifically told my nurse you weren't seeing anyone and had no plans to be pregnant this year. I remember because we joked about it in the hallway. You said, and I'm quoting you almost exactly, 'God, no, not with my life right now.'" Nobody moved. Somewhere behind me, a toddler laughed at something unrelated, a small obscene sound in the sudden vacuum of the yard, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I would remember that laugh forever, that it would be forever stitched into the memory of the moment my family finally cracked open. "I'm not going to stand here," Dr. Reyes continued, and now she did raise her voice slightly, not in anger but in simple clarity, making sure every person at that party heard every word. "In the middle of my patient sister's baby shower, and let a false claim be made about my medical practice and about an event that did not occur. I understand this is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me too. Believe me, this is not how I wanted to spend my Saturday. But I won't let a lie use my name as its alibi. Not today. Not for anyone." Kayla's mouth opened, closed. The mascara tears were still wet on her face, but something underneath them had gone hard and calculating, the visible machinery of a woman recalculating the room in real time, looking for the nearest exit from a story that had, for the first time in 4 years, been contradicted by someone with nothing to gain from the contradiction and no relationship left to protect by staying quiet. She's confused, Kayla said, spinning toward my mother, her voice climbing into a register I recognized, the one that had worked every single time before. I saw a doctor. I don't know why she's saying this. I have never once in 11 years of practice, Dr. Reyes said, cutting cleanly through it. Confused one patient's chart with another's. I'm sorry, Kayla. I know this isn't the venue either of us would have chosen for this conversation, but you brought my name into it, in front of 40 people, and I have an obligation to the truth, not to your comfort. Those are different things, and today they're in conflict, and I have to choose the truth. Why would you do this to me? Kayla's voice cracked, and for just a moment I saw something that might have been genuine. Not grief over a lost pregnancy, but the much rawer panic of a person watching a tool that had worked for 4 straight years suddenly, irrevocably, stop working. You've known me since I was a teenager. You delivered half the babies in this town. Why would you humiliate me like this? I'm not trying to humiliate you, Dr. Reyes said, and her voice, for the first time, softened slightly. Not in retreat, but in something closer to genuine regret. I'm trying to stop a lie from using my professional integrity as its foundation. Those aren't the same thing, even if they feel the same to you right now. I would have said nothing at all, Kayla, if you hadn't said my name. I didn't think, Kayla started, then stopped herself, and I watched the sentence die on her tongue because there was no way to finish it that didn't confirm exactly what everyone in that yard had already begun to understand. She hadn't thought Dr. Reyes would be listening. She hadn't thought in 4 years of successful performances that any prop in the audience might eventually refuse to stay silent. My father, who had said almost nothing at any of the previous incidents, who had stood at the edges of my engagement party and my wedding with the particular helpless silence of a man who didn't know how to referee his own daughters, cleared his throat and said, quietly but audibly, Kayla, is this true? It was the first time in 4 years anyone in my family had asked her that question out loud, in front of witnesses, expecting an actual answer instead of accepting the performance as the answer. She tried to salvage it, of course. She tried the way a drowning person thrashes even after the boat is already 50 yards away and pulling further. Because some part of her, I think, genuinely believed the sheer force of her own conviction had always been enough before, had never once failed her, and couldn't imagine a room that wouldn't eventually bend back toward her, the way every other room always had. You don't understand what it's like, she said, voice climbing higher, tears still streaming though I noticed, cruelly, clinically, that her makeup hadn't smudged the way real crying smudges makeup. To watch your sister get everything every single time, the perfect fiancé, the perfect wedding, the perfect pregnancy, and just be expected to sit there and clap while everyone forgets I exist. Carol, my mother-in-law, who had cried genuine, generous tears at my wedding over Kayla's fabricated toast, who had spent an entire wedding reception believing herself to be witnessing real grief, stepped forward now with her arms crossed, her voice tight with something I'd never heard from her before, a controlled, furious clarity. I cried at your speech, she said to Kayla. At my son's wedding, I told my sister about it on the phone the next week. I told her how brave you were. I have spent a year feeling proud of you for standing up there and sharing something so painful, and none of it was true? She shook her head slowly. Do you have any idea what it does to a person finding out they cried for nothing, finding out their compassion was just used? Nobody expected you to sit there and clap, I said. It was the first thing I'd said since she walked in, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steadier than 4 years of silence had any right to leave it. Steadier than I'd sounded at my own engagement party or my own wedding because this time I wasn't standing there alone. Nobody expected anything from you except honesty. You could have come to my engagement party and just been happy for me. You could have come to my dress fitting, which, by the way, you weren't invited to, and just let me have that afternoon. You could have come to my wedding and just watched me get married instead of turning the toasts into your own eulogy. You could have come here today and eaten a cupcake and gone home. Nobody made you lie, Kayla. You did that. Every single time, you chose that. Dr. Reyes just told 40 people you weren't pregnant, I said, my hand finding the curve of my belly again, an instinct, a shield, a promise. So, Let's not do the part where you tell me I'm imagining things. I've been imagining things for 4 years, apparently, at every single event where you decided my joy needed to become your tragedy instead." My mother was crying now, but not the crying she'd done every other time. Not the reflexive, protective crying that had always flowed toward Kayla like water finding the lowest point in a room. This was different. This was a woman doing arithmetic she'd refused to do for years, out loud in real time, and not liking the sum she kept arriving at no matter how she tried to recalculate it. "The engagement party," my mother said slowly, like she was reading it off a page for the first time, a page that had apparently been sitting in front of her for 4 years while she chose not to read it. "You said you'd lost a baby and there was never... Curtis wasn't even... You weren't seeing anyone that whole year, Kayla, I remember. I asked you at Christmas who the father would have been, and you changed the subject. Mom, please." The dress fitting. My mother's voice was rising now too, and I realized with a strange hollow ache that I was watching my mother grieve, not for Kayla's fake losses, but for 4 years of her own complicity, arriving all at once, too late to undo any of it. "You weren't even invited to that fitting. You crashed it. I drove you home myself. I missed my own daughter finishing her dress fitting because I drove you home. The wedding." This from my mother-in-law, quiet, stricken, a woman realizing she had cried real tears at a stranger's fake toast at her own son's wedding. "You gave a speech at their wedding about losing a baby you'd apparently never..." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Oh my God," my mother said, and sat down, hard, in one of the white folding chairs someone had rented, her hand pressed flat against her chest like she was trying to physically hold something in that had been trying to get out for years. "Oh my God, Kayla! What did you do? What did you do to your sister?" Nobody came to Kayla's defense. That was the part that undid her, I think, more than the exposure itself. Not Dr. Reyes's calm, devastating correction, but the silence that followed it. The specific and total silence of 40 people who had, for 4 years, automatically reached for her every single time, and now, in the space of 90 seconds, found their hands staying exactly where they were. Even my Aunt Denise, who had refilled Kayla's wine glass at the engagement party without a single question, stood frozen by the drinks table with a paper cup halfway to her mouth, staring at Kayla with an expression I can only describe as the specific horror of realizing you've been a supporting character in someone else's decade-long con. My grandmother, 81 years old and rarely one to insert herself into anything, set down her fork with a small, deliberate click against her plate. "Kayla," she said, in the flat, unimpressed voice she'd used on all of us as children, the voice that had ended more arguments in this family than any other single force I could name. "Your mother cried real tears at your sister's wedding because of you. Do you understand that? Real tears. Over nothing." She shook her head slowly. "I raised your mother better than to be this easy to fool, and I am ashamed I didn't see it either." My cousin Ellie, 22 and usually silent at family functions, stood near the back with her phone still raised. She'd been recording the toasts for my mother-in-law, a wedding shower tradition, and I would learn later, uncomfortably, that she'd kept the camera rolling through the entire confrontation without meaning to, too stunned to remember to stop. "I have this on video," she said quietly, to no one in particular, and something about the flat disbelief in her voice, the sound of a 22-year-old realizing footage existed of the exact second her aunt's family mythology collapsed, seemed to seal the moment shut for good, the way a door clicks when it's finally fully closed. "I want to go home," Kayla said. Finally, her voice small now, stripped of its performance register, sounding for the first time in the entire scene almost like an actual person instead of a woman narrating her own tragedy to an audience. "Can someone just take me home?" Nobody moved. My father, eventually, was the one who stood up. Not out of forgiveness, but out of the simple, exhausted duty of a parent who still had to drive his daughter somewhere even after everything. And I watched them walk across my mother-in-law's lawn together, past the elephant cupcakes and the Welcome Baby Grace banner and the 40 faces that had already begun, quietly, tentatively, to reassemble the last 4 years into a different shape entirely. Kayla did not look back once. I don't know if that was shame or fury or simply the last performance she had left in her. The exit, at least, was one she'd apparently rehearsed. Daniel found my hand before I even realized I was reaching for his. "You okay?" he asked, low, just for me, his thumb moving in slow circles against my knuckles the way it always did when he was trying to anchor both of us at once. I looked down at my stomach, at Grace, 11 days from meeting the world, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 4 years of birthdays and holidays and milestones, quietly poisoned by my sister's need to be the center of every room she entered, even the rooms that were never supposed to be about her at all. I felt light, genuinely physically light, in a way that had nothing to do with the extra weight I was carrying and everything to do with the extra weight I had apparently just set down. "I'm okay," I said. And I meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in a long time. The party did not immediately resume. It took nearly 20 minutes of stunned, murmuring recalibration before anyone touched the cake again. People clustered in small, low-voiced groups around the yard, the way mourners cluster after a funeral, except the thing being mourned was harder to name. 4 years of a family's collective judgment, maybe, or the version of themselves that had believed so easily for so long without ever once demanding evidence. I watched my Aunt Denise walk slowly to the drinks table and pour herself a glass of the good wine, the wine reserved for toasts, and drink half of it standing alone, staring at nothing. I watched 2 of Carol's coworkers, women who had never met Kayla before that afternoon, exchange a look that needed no translation. Before the string quartet, at a small nod from my mother-in-law, picked their instruments back up and began tentatively to play. But it did resume. That was the part that surprised me most. Not that the confrontation had happened, which I had in some buried corner of myself been braced for since the moment I invited Dr. Reyes, but that the party survived it. That the banner stayed up. That Priya, 20 minutes later, pressed a cupcake into my hand and said fiercely and quietly, "You did that. You built that door, and you didn't even have to open it yourself." And I understood she meant it as the highest compliment she had. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just made a phone call and sent an invitation." "That's not nothing, Maddie." Priya sat down beside me on the wide wooden bench under the oak tree, the same bench, I realized, where Kayla had once sat sobbing in black at my engagement party in this same family's collective memory, though this was Carol's yard, not my parents', a different tree entirely. And yet the echo of it felt significant anyway, like the universe was offering a kind of rhyme. 4 years and everyone around you kept telling you the kind thing to do was stay quiet. You didn't stay quiet. You just found a way to do it that didn't require you to be the one raising your voice. That's not nothing. That's the smartest thing I've ever watched anyone do to a bully. "She's not a bully," I said automatically, some old reflex of protecting Kayla's reputation even now still firing on autopilot. Priya raised an eyebrow, and I heard myself, and laughed. A real laugh, surprising myself with it, the first one since the side gate had creaked open an hour earlier. "Okay," I said. "Maybe she's a bully." "She built 4 years of your family's sympathy out of things that never happened," Priya said gently, no longer teasing. "I think you're allowed to call it what it is now." I sat with that for a moment, cupcake going soft and sweet in my hand, watching the party slowly reassemble itself around us. My mother directing someone toward the cake. Carol resetting a toppled chair, my father standing near the gate as though guarding it now, unnecessarily, against a return that never came. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I am." My mother came to me an hour later, after the party had cautiously, tentatively, begun to feel like a party again, after someone had cued the music back up and my aunt had started cutting the cake like the ground under all of us hadn't just shifted violently and permanently. My mother's eyes were red and her hands were shaking, and she took both of mine in hers, careful of the paper plate I was holding. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry, Maddie. I have to sit with what I did. All those years I made you smaller so she could feel bigger, and I didn't even—" Her voice broke. "I didn't even ask you how you felt. Not once. Not at your own engagement party. Not at your own wedding. I was so busy protecting the daughter who was hurting that I never once stopped to ask whether the daughter who wasn't hurting might be hurting anyway, because of me. I know, Mom. I did know. I had known for years, in the specific, exhausted way you know a thing you've decided not to say out loud, because saying it costs more than swallowing it." "How long did you know? About all of it?" I looked past her, at Dr. Reyes, who was standing by the dessert table now, calmly eating a cupcake like she hadn't just detonated 4 years of family mythology with 11 sentences. Like this was simply Saturday. "Long enough to invite the one person who wouldn't let it happen again," I said. "Long enough to stop waiting for someone else to say something and build a way for the truth to say it instead." My mother nodded slowly, absorbing that, and I watched her face do something complicated. Grief still, for the daughter she'd spent 4 years protecting for the wrong reasons. But underneath it, something that looked almost like respect, aimed at me for the first time in longer than I could easily remember. The 11 days between the shower and Grace's birth were strange, suspended days, the kind of days that feel simultaneously endless and much too short. My body counting down toward labor while the rest of me was still processing everything that had happened in that backyard. I didn't sleep well. Not because I was afraid of anything. The opposite, really. I kept waking at 3 and 4 in the morning with a strange, unfamiliar lightness in my chest, reaching instinctively for the old anxious knot that had lived there for 4 years, and finding each time that it simply wasn't there anymore. It took my body several nights to stop expecting the weight to still be present. I remember lying awake at 4 in the morning, 9 days before my due date, one hand on my belly, feeling Grace's slow, late pregnancy movements, thinking, with something close to wonder, that this was probably what it felt like for other people all the time. This unremarkable, ordinary peace. Kayla didn't come to the hospital when Grace was born 11 days later. I hadn't expected her to, and I found holding my daughter for the first time under fluorescent light with Daniel crying quietly beside the bed, his whole face open in a way I'd never seen before, that I didn't miss the absence at all. There was no phantom ache where Kayla should have been, no reflexive glance toward the door. My mother came, hesitant at first, then unable to stop crying the good kind of tears for once, holding her granddaughter with a kind of careful reverence I recognized as penance as much as joy. My mother-in-law came, practical and warm, immediately taking over the hospital room's small logistics the way she took over everything. Dr. Reyes, off shift but unable to resist, poked her head in for 2 minutes just to see the baby she'd helped protect before she was even born, and I thanked her in a way that had nothing to do with medicine, holding her hand a beat longer than a handshake required. "You didn't have to do that," I told her, at the shower. "You could have stayed quiet. Nobody would have blamed you." "I would have blamed me," Dr. Reyes said simply. "I don't like being used as a prop in someone else's lie. That's not about you, Maddie. That's just about me not being willing to let that happen in a room I'm standing in." She smiled, small and tired. Though I'll admit, watching your mother do the math out loud was one of the more satisfying afternoons I've had in a while. I heard, weeks later, through the same family grapevine that had spread Kayla's lies for 4 years and now, apparently, spread the unraveling of them with equal speed that Kayla had tried the story one more time. At a coworker's baby shower of all places, a room full of people who had no history with her and no reason to doubt her. I heard someone there had known someone who'd been at mine. I heard the story didn't survive the second telling. It arrived already wearing its own contradiction, a rumor 2 steps ahead of her, and she left that party early too. Though this time, apparently, nobody drove her home. I heard, months later still, that Marcus, the boyfriend from the Thanksgiving after my engagement party, or perhaps a different Marcus I genuinely lost track, had asked her, point blank during some unrelated argument, whether any of it had ever been real and that the fight that followed had ended the relationship entirely. I don't know if that's true. I've stopped verifying the things I hear about my sister because I've realized I don't actually need to know anymore. It isn't my ledger to keep this time. The week after the shower was its own strange, exhausting aftermath, separate from anything that happened in the yard itself. The family group chat, which had existed for years as a mostly dormant thread for birthday reminders and the occasional meme from my father, exploded into a slow-motion argument that lasted 4 days. My Aunt Denise sent a long message admitting she'd never once questioned the engagement party miscarriage and apologizing directly to me, tagging me by name, which felt both overdue and strange, a stranger's apology for a wound I'd stopped expecting anyone to acknowledge. A cousin I barely spoke to sent 3 separate messages defending Kayla, insisting we were all piling on a woman who clearly needed help, not humiliation. And for a day or two, I felt the old guilt trying to resurface, trying to convince me that Dr. Reyes's 11 sentences had been a cruelty rather than a correction. Daniel found me on the back porch that evening, phone in my lap, and asked what was wrong. I showed him the message. He read it twice, then set my phone face down on the table between us. "Do you know what's actually cruel?" he said. 4 years of watching someone drain the joy out of every good day you've ever had and calling it grief so nobody's allowed to say anything. That's cruelty. What happened Saturday wasn't cruelty. It was just the first time anyone in your family was honest in a room with her in it. He paused. "You don't owe your cousin an explanation for that. You especially don't owe Kayla one." I didn't respond to the cousin. I didn't respond to most of the thread, actually. I let my mother, of all people, take over that role, surprising everyone including herself by typing out a long, careful message defending me. defending Dr. Reyes, laying out the timeline of all 3 incidents in a way that made the pattern undeniable even to relatives who'd only ever seen fragments of it. It was, I think, the first time in my adult life my mother had ever gone to bat for me in writing in a format that couldn't later be softened into a private, forgettable conversation. I saved a screenshot of it. I don't know why. I think some part of me needed proof that it had actually happened. The way you sometimes need proof of the good things too, not just the bad ones. My father called me 2 days later, which he almost never did. Phone calls were my mother's domain. My father communicated primarily through forwarded articles and the occasional gruff hug, and said without much preamble, "I should have asked her that question a long time ago. Is this true?" I don't know why it took me so long. I don't either, I said honestly. But you asked it when it mattered most. That counts for something. Does it? It does to me, I said, and found that I meant it. Kayla called me once, 3 weeks after the shower, on a Tuesday afternoon while Grace was napping and the house was quiet enough that I actually picked up without checking who it was first, a reflex I'd regret and not regret in equal measure. "I just want you to know," she said without preamble, without a hello, "that you humiliated me in front of the entire family. On purpose. You planned that." "I planned to make sure the truth was in the room," I said. "You planned 4 years of funerals for babies that never existed. I'm not sure those are the same kind of planning, Kayla." There was a long silence on the line, the particular silence of someone recalibrating an argument they'd expected to win. "You don't understand what it's like," she started, and I recognized the sentence immediately, the same sentence from the yard worn smooth from overuse like a stone in a pocket. "I know," I said, more gently than I felt. "You've told me. At my engagement party, at my wedding, at my baby shower, I've heard what it's like, Kayla, from your perspective more times than I've ever gotten to just be happy without an asterisk on it. I don't know what it's like from your side, maybe you're right about that, but I know exactly what it's like from mine and I'm done pretending I don't." "So that's it? You're just done? I'm your sister." "You are," I said, and found to my own surprise that I meant it without cruelty, just as a plain fact, the way you'd state a fact about weather or geography. "And I'll always answer if you call in an actual emergency. But I'm not going to keep building space in my life for the version of you that needs my joy to be smaller than your pain. I don't think that's a sister. I think that's just someone who happens to share my last name." "So what am I supposed to do now?" Kayla asked, and for one brief moment, her voice lost its edge entirely, sounding almost young, almost like the sister I remembered from before either of us had any concept of what our family would eventually become. "Everyone knows. Everyone in that yard knows, and probably everyone they've told since. I can't go back to book club. I can't go back to work without people whispering. You didn't just take away one afternoon, Maddie. You took away 4 years of everything people thought they knew about me." "They thought they knew a version of you that wasn't real," I said, as gently as I could manage, because underneath the anger I still hadn't fully let go of, some old stubborn tenderness for her flickered anyway, the way it probably always would, the specific ache of loving someone you no longer trust. "I'm not the one who took that away, Kayla. You built it out of things that never happened. I just stopped agreeing to hold it up for you." "That's easy for you to say. You have everything." "I have a husband who believes me," I said, "and a daughter who's never once had to share a birthday with someone else's invented tragedy, and a family that finally, after 4 years, asked you a question instead of just accepting your answer. I didn't get that by having everything, Kayla. I got that by being done." She hung up on me. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while afterward, phone still in my hand, waiting to feel guilty, the way I always had before. The reflexive guilt that had governed every interaction with her since I was 15 years old and nobody came to my soccer game. It didn't come. I noticed its absence the way you notice a headache finally lifting. Not relief exactly, just a strange, spacious quiet where the pain used to live. I don't know what happened to her after that. Not really. Not in the day-to-day way I used to know everything about my sister's carefully curated tragedies, because tracking her had been, I realized only in its absence, a kind of second job I'd been quietly working for 4 years, without ever naming it as labor. I know my mother calls me now instead of her, most days, sometimes twice. I know the string of lights is still up in my parents' backyard, repaired twice since my engagement party, replaced once entirely, and that next Thanksgiving. For the first time in 5 years, nobody will be performing grief at the table while my daughter learns what it looks like when a room is allowed, finally, to be happy for the right reasons, without an understudy waiting in the wings to steal the scene. That Thanksgiving came faster than I expected. Grace was 5 months old by then, sitting up on her own, delighted by anything that made noise, and I carried her into my parents' house braced out of sheer habit for some version of the old current, some fresh crisis timed to swallow the holiday whole. It didn't come. My mother had set an extra leaf in the table for the high chair. My father said grace, actual grace, the prayer kind, and thanked God specifically by name for Grace, the baby kind, and I watched my mother's eyes fill and not spill over, a small victory in itself. Kayla wasn't there. Nobody asked where she was, not out loud, and I understood that the not asking was its own kind of answer, a boundary the whole family had arrived at separately and was now quietly holding together. Dr. Reyes sent a card that week, unprompted, a small watercolor bird on the front and nothing inside but her signature and a single line. Glad the truth got there first. I keep it on the refrigerator, under a magnet shaped like an elephant, next to a photo from the shower that Priya took before any of it happened. Me in my sunshine yellow dress, one hand on my belly, laughing at something just out of frame, entirely unaware of what the afternoon still had waiting for her. I look at that photo sometimes and think about how much I didn't know yet, standing there, and how much I'd already quietly prepared for anyway. Both things were true. I've learned that both things can be true at once. You can be blindsided by a person and still have built the exact door you needed before they ever walked through it. I used to think the worst thing my sister ever did was lie about losing a baby. I was wrong. The worst thing she did was teach an entire family that my joy was something to be managed, minimized, apologized for, something smaller and lower priority than her performance of pain, no matter how many times the performance repeated, no matter how thin the evidence ever got. It took a doctor speaking 11 true sentences to undo 4 years of that lesson, 11 sentences that cost her nothing to say and cost my sister everything to hear. And I will spend the rest of my life grateful that this one time when it mattered more than it had ever mattered before, I made sure the truth got there first. Grace is 6 weeks old now. She has Daniel's eyes and, I'm told, my stubborn chin, and she sleeps best against my chest in the early mornings when the house is quiet and nobody is performing anything for anyone. Sometimes, rocking her in the gray half-light before sunrise, I think about that yard, that silence, the exact second Dr. Reyes set down her cup of punch, and I feel something settle in me that I don't think will ever come loose again. I built a door. I never had to force it open. I only had to make sure, after 4 years of watching every other door in my life get quietly closed in my face, that this once, the truth would be standing on the other side of it, ready to walk through first. Grace's first birthday landed on a Saturday, warm and bright, and we held it in the same backyard where the shower had happened, Carol insisting the oak tree was ours now in some unspoken family sense, the string lights rehung, a new banner strung between the same 2 low branches, this one reading simply 1, in the same gold cursive as before. I stood under those lights with Grace on my hip, watching her reach chubby fingers toward the balloons, and found myself doing an inventory I hadn't planned to do. Counting the faces in the yard the way I once, without meaning to, had spent years counting slights. My mother was there, of course, arriving early to help set up, staying late to help take down, present in the unglamorous middle of things in a way she'd never quite managed before. My father grilled, badly, cheerfully, the same way Daniel's father always had. Dr. Reyes came for an hour between rounds, bringing a small stuffed elephant that matched uncannily the theme of the original shower, and when I thanked her again, for the whole year, for everything that had followed from those 11 sentences, she just shrugged and said, I just told the truth at a party once. You're the one who built everything that came after it. Priya gave another toast, shorter this time, mostly about how impossibly fast a year moves. And there was no interruption, no side gate creaking open at the wrong moment, no black dress arriving to eclipse the afternoon. The absence of that possibility, the fact that I no longer flinched even slightly at the sound of the gate, felt like its own quiet miracle, one I hadn't fully appreciated until I noticed I'd stopped bracing for it sometime around Grace's 9th month without ever consciously deciding to. Kayla wasn't invited. I want to be honest about that because I think honesty is the entire point of everything that happened, the whole reason any of this mattered enough to write down. It wasn't punishment. Not anymore, not by the time a year had passed. Punishment requires a kind of ongoing anger I simply didn't have the energy to sustain once Grace arrived and filled up all the space that anger used to occupy. It was just accuracy. She was not, by then, a person who showed up for things without needing them to become about her, and I had a 1-year-old who deserved a birthday that was entirely, uncomplicatedly hers. I heard secondhand weeks later that Kayla had started therapy. I hope that's true. I hope genuinely, without irony, that she finds whatever she was actually looking for in 4 years of invented grief, because I think, underneath all of it, there was probably something real she never learned how to ask for directly. Attention maybe, or reassurance that she mattered as much as I did, without needing to manufacture a tragedy to prove it. I don't know if I'll ever find out. I've made a kind of peace with not knowing. The same peace I made with not driving myself home from every party for 4 years, checking timelines, doing math I hated myself for doing. What I know instead is this. My daughter is 1 year old, she laughs at the exact sound of a spoon hitting a bowl, and every party she has ever attended has belonged entirely and without asterisk to her. That's the whole revenge, if you want to call it that. Not the 11 sentences in the yard, though I'll always be grateful for those. The revenge is quieter than that, and it happens every single day I get to watch my daughter be celebrated without anyone in the room needing it to be about anything but her. Sometimes at night, folding the small mountain of laundry that seems to regenerate itself daily now that Grace exists, I think about the version of myself who sat in Dr. Rhea's office at 16 weeks pregnant, hands shaking, asking a doctor a question I'd been too afraid to ask for 4 years. Not, is my sister lying? Which felt too dangerous, too final, but the smaller, safer version. What happens if she is? I think about how much courage that small question actually required, dressed up as it was in careful, hedged language, and how strange it is that the biggest turn of my adult life started not with a confrontation, but with a woman quietly asking a doctor where a line was drawn, just in case she ever needed to know. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what made Kayla the way she is, or whether understanding it would even change how I feel about any of it now. I've stopped needing that answer the way I used to need it. Back when I thought if I could just locate the reason, I could fix it, or at least forgive it properly the way you're supposed to forgive family. What I have instead is simpler, and I think, in the end, more useful. A daughter who has never once had her joy treated as a resource to be redistributed, a family that finally learned to ask questions instead of absorbing performances whole, and a doctor's card on my refrigerator with a watercolor bird and 11 true sentences behind it that I will be grateful for as long as I live. The truth got there first. It's still there now, every single day, standing quietly in the doorway of my life, and I don't ever plan to let it leave.